Hey everyone, I wanted to quickly highlight the moves that have occurred so far this offseason. It's been quite eventful with a number of players joining new teams and then also a ton of extensions occurring. I feel like everyone right now is focused on Simon and where he's going to end up, rightfully so. But I thought, hey, let's highlight the moves that have occurred and what's been a very eventful offseason. So starting up here at the top, we have Clash Discs. So they've signed 3 new players, Erica Stinchcomb, Scott Withers, and James Proctor, all to new one-year deals. And they've also extended Eric Oakley and Evan Smith another year. Solid offseason from Clash Discs. They, of course, dropped Nico, and it seemed like they needed to get some new players in there. Now, I don't think any of these players have the name recognition of Nico, but it is a start, and then also, of course, extending someone like Eric Oakley helps. So, good offseason thus far from Clash. Next up, we have DGA. They've extended Katrina Allen another year. I would suspect they would like to have signed her for multiple years, but Katrina, of course, knows her worth, so I would assume she's sticking with the one-year deal for now, and we'll see what happens next year when we're up for contract once again. Next, we have Gavin Babcock signs a one-year deal with Discmania coming over from Prodigy. Gavin had a good season last year, really emerged on the Pro Tour, and seems like a good signing for Discmania. Nothing's going to feel like it fills the void for Simon's departure, but it's a start getting an up-and-coming player on tour like Gavin. It certainly doesn't hurt, but unless they somehow get Simon back or sign Valerie, sign Anthony Barella, this offseason's not looking great for them overall. Next up, we have discraft, so just in. Brody extends for 2 more years. Kind of surprising. A lot of people would speculate that he'd leave discraft to try to get out of the shadow of McBeth and Dickerson and maybe become the face of one of the manufacturers, but it looks like he's sticking around another 2 years. They've also extended Andrew Presnell, Andrew Fish, and Vanessa Van Dyken for another year. So some moves for discraft, but not signing anyone new thus far. Dynamics similar, so they've extended Chris Clemens and Macy Valadiaz for 1 more year. They did lose Valerie Mandujano though, which is quite significant on the FPO side, as she's a top 5 or 6 player, and I don't see, with the exception of signing Simon, anyone that's really going to be able to fill her shoes, especially on the FPO side. They definitely lost their best FPO player over there at Dynamic, so we'll see what happens moving forward. Next up, we have Infinite. So they've signed Maria Oliva for 1 year. She also signed with another manufacturer, which we'll see down below, but she left Innova and now signs this kind of split deal that's becoming more common these days. Now getting to Innova, the most active of all of the manufacturers, at least deal-wise. So they've signed only 1 new player, Jona Heinonen. Apologies if I butchered it. But Jona has signed a 2-year deal. I'm not sure which manufacturer he's coming from or if he was unsponsored. But it sounds like he's been really prominent in the European scene, so it sounds like a good deal for Innova, as they've been targeting a lot of the European talent over the past couple of years. Then moving to the extensions, which is quite the list. So we'll start on the MPO side. Most significant, they've signed Calvin to a 5-year extension. If they lost him, they would not have had a top-tier pro on the MPO side. First they lose Paul, then Ricky. Thankfully, they managed to re-sign Calvin another 5 years, so they have one of those top-tier players on the MPO side that can kind of be the face of the brand. Additionally, they re-signed Bradley for another year. He had a good year last year, picked up a big win. Good re-signing on their part. They then re-signed Philo and Nathan Queen to 1-year extensions. They're interesting because neither one of them really played much last year, but they are prominent on the broadcasting side, and I have no doubt they moved Tour Series, so I'm sure that was a solid re-signing for Innova. Next up, Garrett, so he re-signs for another 3 years. That's a good pickup for Innova. Garrett is definitely one of their top MPO players, so good to re-sign him for another 3. And then lastly, Joel Freeman, probably their second best MPO player behind Calvin. Joel, borderline top 10 player in recent years, and they've got him for another 2 years. So Innova when it was looking like they were losing a ton of players, which they did lose 7 or 8 pros, they did manage to keep, quite a few of their top MPO players, which is important. And the same is true on the FPO side. So Owned signs for another 2 years. Jennifer Allen, another 2 years. Evelina and Hannah signed for another 3. Haley King, another year. Kat Murch, one of the emerging FPO players, another 2. Jessica Weiss, Holly Finley, Emily Beach, all another year. But focusing mainly on Own, Evelina, and Hannah, those are 3 of the top 5 or 6 FPO players in the world. And Innova managed to re-sign all 3, which is great for them. And Evelina and Hannah, if they can fix their putting, I'm sure will round out like the top 3 or 4 next year with Kristen and maybe Katrina. It's just always been the putting for them. So we'll see. But Innova's FPO side is absolutely stacked. I'm sure Kristen will still, for the most part, dominate next year. But if anyone has a chance at having a player kind of pop off and become the number 1 in the FPO field, it will be Innova with one of these 3, or even Haley, Kat. There are a lot of options here. So I think Innova's had a pretty dang good offseason, actually, and we'll see if they jump at one of the free agents. Next up, Castoplast signed Stacy Ronsley for 1 year. Latitude, so they lost Emerson Keith, but they did re-sign Rebecca Cox for 1 year and Silver Lot for another 3 years. Latitude, the face of that brand is Kristen, of course, but losing Emerson on the MPO side certainly hurt like brand recognition for that division, so we'll see if they make any moves to try to make up for that. Speaking of Emerson, we now move to Lone Star. So starting with extensions, Lone Star extended Chandler Kramer another year. I'd say last year he was probably the face of Lone Star and certainly did them well with how well he played at like European Open and a number of events. So he's with them another year, but then they also signed Nico for 3 years coming from Clash. Emerson Keith signs for a year. The married couple, AJ Carey, Deanne Carey, they both signed for a year. Robert Burridge, definitely one of the up-and-coming players on tour right now, signs for a year. I feel like that's maybe Innova's biggest loss, or as far as one we could look back in a few years and think Innova had a chance to sign him. He seems like he's going to continue to get better, and it seems like a really good pickup for Lone Star, but time will tell. And then Lisa Fakis, I can never pronounce her name, but that's another loss. That's definitely their biggest FPO loss, because Lisa, when she plays in the bigger events, she's usually in the mix. So I'm surprised Innova, with their focus on really solidifying their FPO team as like the best in disc golf, I'm surprised they didn't keep Lisa, but maybe Lone Star just made a better offer. So she'll undoubtedly be the face of FPO disc golf for Lone Star, so hope she does well. Then moving on to Mint Discs, so coming over from Innova, Mason Ford signed a 2-year deal. Seems like he'll now be the face of Mint Discs, so probably good signing for them. MVP, they've extended James Conrad 4 years. Definitely one of the more notable moves of the entire offseason is that extension. So he's with them another 4 years, and then Stacy Haas signs a 2-year extension. Time will tell on what MVP does with Simon, but for now they're at least re-signing the face of their company. Next up we have Prodigy, so they've extended Alden Harris another year. Prodigy is going to have an interesting offseason, I guess, next year, because I would think, Alden will be up again. I think Gannon will be up. I'm not sure about Isaac Robinson or Kevin Jones, but they have the way things are trending, 4 potential signings, big signings coming up, particularly Gannon, who's going to be probably the hottest free agent next year. So I'm really curious what Prodigy's going to do, but they've at least kept Alden for another year. But that should be fascinating next year if 2 or 3 of them are up for extensions. Then lastly, we have Thought Space. So Thought Space re-signs Matt Bell for 2 years. He's probably the face of the brand right now. They signed James Proctor, who also had signed with Clash, so he is a 1-year deal with Clash and Thought Space. Maria Oliva, she's the one that signed with Infinite as well, so the manufacturer she's split with will be ThoughtSpace. And then Thomas Gilbert signs a 2-year deal coming over from Prodigy. So him and Matt Bell, I'd say, are now going to be, probably Thomas more so, but the face of ThoughtSpace. So yet another one of these small manufacturers making pretty big moves. So now moving to the winners and losers. I think winners clash for sure. I think they've taken the right steps to help to fill the void of Nico no longer being a part of the organization. And I think they'll continue to gain prominence. Lone Star, for a similar reason, Lone Star probably more so than any really made a splash this offseason. Signing Nico, signing Emerson, Robert Burridge, Lisa. Like Lone Star really jumped on the scene this year after people probably for the most part started hearing about them last year with Chandler Kramer's success, and now all of a sudden they've signed 5 or 6 players. They're absolutely a winner, and ThoughtSpace could be here as well for the same reason, signing James, Maria, and most importantly Thomas Gilbert. We're seeing several smaller manufacturers really emerging and are going to have players that are competitive near the top in these big tournaments, and that's exciting. It's not just the same 4 or 5 manufacturers anymore. Now losers, I think Discmania is the obvious one. Regardless of who they sign, no one's going to be able to fill the shoes of Simon. So for now, Discmania is looking like definitely the biggest loser of the off season, and we'll see how they recover. They still have Eagle, they still have Simon, God, I wish. They still have Eagle, they still have Kyle, but what will they do to round out that Crush Boys trio? And then next, Dynamic. I just think Dynamic losing Valerie is a really big hit on the FPO side. If they get Simon, that of course makes up for it all. Or even Barella would help a lot. But for now, I'd say Dynamic's one of the losers. And then, I forgot to mention winners. Innova, obviously. I only talked about the small ones. But Innova with pulling off all these extensions, absolutely a winner this offseason. Big free agent, Simon. The majority of people speculate MVP. I would put money also on MVP just because generally they're right. They were right about Conrad. They were right about Ricky. So I'd say MVP. If I had to give a contrarian pick outside of MVP, I would go Innova. Just they're not signing really any new players. They are extending, which there's a lot of money behind all of these, but Innova has the money to be able to afford someone like Simon. So that'll be my pick if it's not MVP. And then Valerie, I'm also going to go Innova for the same reason. Really trying to build out their FPO team, I guess you'd call it. And Valerie, I mean, if they get her, they have 4 of the top 6 FPO players in the world, with the exception of Katrina and Kristen. We'll see what Paige does. But I think that would make it 4 of the top 6, which would be crazy. So I'm going to put Innova as my top destination for Valerie. But we'll see what happens. Very interesting to see if Discraft or Dynamics in on all of this. So let me know your thoughts down below. Where you think Simon's going, where you think Valerie's going, who you think's won or lost the offseason thus far, and we will wait to see. I'm sure one of the announcements is coming this week because we're only about a little over a month away from the first Pro Tour event, so it's got to come soon. And hopefully this week, fingers crossed. All right, thanks everyone for